Record on this computer. So to let everybody know, fair warning, we are recording for people who cannot make it tonight. So if you do not want your beautiful faces visible when we share this out on YouTube or maybe on one of our Patreons, um, feel free to turn your camera off.
Or turn it
Um,
oh, let's do it.
it'll probably get all
Okay.
of like 3 views or 4, but just in case
Right.
it is being recorded. And I'd like to say a big hello and thank you and welcome to Magical Memory Techniques in a Crash Course in Lenormand. This is a custom designed class for this audience. We have taken my partner Brent's, like we were saying, Magical Memory Tour class and my course, A Crash Course in Lenormand, and we have combined the best of both worlds. So first, Brent is going to be sharing some information with us about memory techniques and how you can apply them to memorize things like Lenormand keywords and associating the number of the Lenormand card to the image, which helps with some Lenormand techniques. And then I am going to be talking about the Grand Tableau layout in Lenormand and the best way to use it and a bunch of cool methods to interpret cards in the layout because people sometimes are faced with 36 cards and go, dear Lord, those are a lot of cards. And the layout can be a little bit intimidating, but it can give you a ton of information and is very simple to use once you get used to it. And so I'm going to be sharing some techniques for how to use that. So with that, I will say for folks who don't know me, my name is Dee. I write books on magic and occult and tarot and Lenormand. Um, I have a book out called Burn a Black Candle. I have a Lenormand deck I created called the Emblemata Lenormand. And I will now let Brent introduce himself.
All right, my name is Brent Peters. I'm Dee's partner, obviously. I'm in the process of writing a book on how to apply memory techniques to tarot. We'll see how that goes. I have studied tarot for 25, 26 years and memory techniques for almost exactly as long. Lenormand is not my specialty, it's more Dee's thing. But these techniques can be applied to lots and lots of things. I'm used to applying them to tarot, but so we're going to apply them to Lenormand tonight. But you can use these techniques to apply to lots of different things in your life, as you will see. I think we're good to go.
All right, let's see if I can convince. There we go. So if you are interested, there is a QR code on your screen. You can scan that to get access to just a quick reference list of keywords for Lenormand. There's another QR code on the right-hand side of your screen that is takes you to information about the Emblemata Lenormand. But if you scan the one on the left-hand side, it will take you a list of meanings and keywords for Lenormand. And the reason why I do that is I'm pretty sure that everybody in this room is already very familiar with keywords for Lenormand. But I like to start us out just using the same meaning so that when we kind of go through some of the exercises, you'll be like, that's not my usual keyword. You'll at least have a list of the keywords that I am working off of, and it might make it just a little bit easier.
All right, so I'm going to talk about first the general principles of memory techniques, a little bit of the background. These techniques really go back to, depending upon the technique involved, the classical times, medieval times, and the Renaissance. So they have a very interesting, colorful history. They were used oftentimes in rhetoric when somebody would give a speech and need to remember all of the points of their speech. They were used also didactically in teaching methods, how to memorize, just about anything. Another interesting point that you might find going forward is if you look at medieval stuff, you will find lots of examples of things that look like trees, or climbing vines or something that branch out, and they'll have little pictures on all the different branches, or sometimes just numbers or something. Usually the drawings are very badly done from our standards, and it's not because They couldn't do better necessarily. It didn't matter. And sometimes the grotesque nature of the figures was a helpful tool to remember them because they're shocking and weird. And we're going to talk about why that is here in just a second. But it was a very common thing. And if you don't understand these memory techniques, this stuff looks just really, really weird. But it was a time when you couldn't distribute, 15, 20 copies of a textbook and everybody have them. Texts were oftentimes in a certain university, and people would travel for months to go view a text and then try to, didn't have time to copy it, remember the key details, and then, take that home with them. So these techniques were very, very valuable. They were used also in teaching, types of morality, Christian doctrine, and such. You will find, if you look at medieval manuscripts of the Bible, the Gospels, or something, you'll find some strange images representing the four Gospels. And what they are is all of the major aspects of theology of those Gospels put together in one sort of crazy picture. And it just looks like people in the Middle Ages have just lost their mind. But what it really is they have techniques that, for lots of different reasons, mostly moralistic reasons, were done away with at some point. There was some phobia at some point that filling your mind with all sorts of weird images was somehow anti-Christian and was going to doom your soul and all kinds of stuff. And so we really lost a fantastic didactic technique. So some of the things that will help in any memory that you make for yourself, Lenormand or anything else, is exaggeration. Some of I've got 4 bullet points here, Dee put together for me, but they all sort of overlap. There's not really a neat division, but anything that involves exaggeration is going to be something that helps you remember it. If you're, I don't know, you're in the kitchen doing something and all of a sudden there's a loud bang, you're going to remember that. It's a flashbulb memory, like a flash going off. If there was a bright flash of light, you would remember that as well. It's weird. Okay. If you were sitting at a dining table and somebody is distributing silverware, let's say, to various places, and to the left of you is sitting a person who is given a fork, spoon, and knife that are 4 foot long each, you're going to remember that because it's very strange. Okay, so it's exaggerated. So if you're trying to remember, for example, that you need to pick up a can of soup at the grocery store, imagine a can of soup that fills the entire room, or so large that it is busting out of the top of the roof of the grocery store. It's an image that is much less forgettable than just trying to remember something on the shelf of the pantry or the grocery store, because it's normal. And so it gets lost in all the normalness. So you have to do something with it to make it stand out. Shock value, kind of the same thing, but not necessarily the same thing. If just talking off the top of my head, the movie Aliens, it's very memorable. There's probably one scene that you remember more than any other, right? When they first board the ship. No, it's when it pops out of the guy's stomach, right? Why? Because it's horrific. It has all of these things, right? It's terrifying and it's weird. Things don't normally pop out of people's stomachs too often. And so that's going to stick in your mind. So, for generations, you see that movie, that's what you think of, and vice versa. You see that image, brings the whole movie to mind. So you remember it. And so what you want to do is create that for yourself. So it could be a horrific image, right? I mean, you could imagine, trying to remember soup, you could imagine a can of soup popping out of your head or your stomach. It isn't pleasant, but it's about memorizing, remembering something, recalling something you want to remember. You can have fun with it. Okay. It could be shocking in other ways. Maybe pick up the can and it's hot. Maybe the can starts to shake and then explodes. Okay. But shock value can also be other things. We tend to remember things that offend us morally. Okay. You know where I'm going with that probably. There are books on memory that suggest that use X-rated images. It's Italian. There's an Italian guy that was very famous for his ability to memorize, and he wouldn't give away a secret for a very long time. And then towards the end of his life, somebody pressed him for it, and he goes, "Okay, I'll tell you that I have these memory palaces, and they're full of beautiful women. So that's what because he could remember these images. So nobody's messing with the privacy of your mind. So something that is horrifying, it could be wonderful as well, right? Um, so there you go. Anything that elicits deep emotion, strong emotion, is going to help you remember. Plurality. So to remember, so one way you can sort of emphasize something is to imagine that there's a bunch of them, very, very big, or a bunch of them. So imagine, if you don't want to forget, again, that can of soup, you want to remember to buy soup. You open your pantry and you're just inundated with cans and cans and cans of soup. Or you go into the grocery store, and to your shock and horror, the entire grocery store is full of cans of soup, and they're just multiplying, like Star Trek triples, I
Tribbles.
think. Yeah, triples. So, cans of soup multiplying and taking over. It's a silly image you're going to remember. So lots of that thing. If you just try to remember one, um, it's not going to be as easy. You could do this with other things. Like, say you want to remember where your car keys are, and you put them down. Maybe you put them in a drawer. So you can imagine either a very large key emerging from the drawer, or it busting open the table, or you open the drawer and keys and keys and keys and keys pour out of this. Okay. Um, you can imagine a key growing to human size and yelling at you and saying car key or something strange. Okay. Humor, if you want to call that humor. But yeah, humor can help. Vividness. So the more detailed you can make an image, the more realistic that's also going to help. Now, realistic shouldn't necessarily oppose all the ridiculousness. What I'm talking about is um, pay attention to some detail. If it is something that's in front of you and you can look at it, and you may have never actually really ever looked at your car keys. And just the act of looking at your car keys and looking at the little serial number or something, it's going to help create an image because you're spending time on it. Okay. And you're learning some new piece of information. So getting the details down of something. uh, Can of soup, you want to remember it, don't just look at the label, because if it's beans and rice, you've probably had beans and rice a million times. Look at where it was canned, right? Somewhere in Iowa, and you go, Iowa? Okay, well, you're going to remember that. That'll stick in your mind better than just, the same can that you've seen a million times. Okay. Some of the methods, these are just a few. These are kind of the main ones, and all others are kind of variations of these. Chaining is you take one image and you attach the next image to it. So this is very good for lists, grocery lists, and this kind of stuff. We're going to be using it for the cards. And should I continue work off this slide? I can't remember what the next slide is. Is a
It's
peg
your
technique? I think.
the peg technique slide.
Okay, so I'll stick with chaining. So let's talk about chaining. So you all know Lenormand pretty well, so this is not going to be something that's going to be earth-shattering for you. But if you want to make sure, let's say you're going to have a lecture on Lenormand cards, or you just want to quiz yourself and make sure that you know all of the cards well, and quiz yourself on the meanings or something. Or you could also use this if you wanted to memorize a spread. Now, you wouldn't want to do this with every spread probably, but if there's one in particular that you want to kind of record in your mind, you could use this to kind of connect the cards in the spread so you could remember it later. And it goes like this. So the first card is the rider. You know what the rider looks like, probably, right? Get an image of usually a guy on a horse, right? Um, and maybe you picture it, I don't know, in your front lawn or in the middle of the mall or something, but you get that image. And then the next is clover. Okay. So if you have a beginning point, that's important. And you already know the rider is the beginning point, but with it, when you're building a chain, it's important to have that first one. It's interesting that the word clue, it's a clue, right? The word clue comes from the end of a ball of twine or yarn or thread, that if you've wound up a big ball, the starting place is the very end of the unwound portion, because once you have that, you can get the rest. It's the same. So once you have your starting point, you can vividly imagine the rider, then the next thing is clover. So how do you get that to work with it? Well, you can imagine the horse eating clover, but don't just imagine a normal sort of clump of clover. Imagine lots of clover, or imagine a 10-foot tall clover with maybe 3 leaves or 4 leaves or 12 leaves, right? A monster clover that's maybe animated and is resisting the horse gnawing on it. And the horse is maybe, cartoonish, trying to bite at the clover. Okay. So now you're connecting the horse of the rider with the clover. Okay. You get a very clear image. Maybe the clover wraps around the horse's head, trying to stop it from biting it. Some strange animation. It also physically connects horse to clover. So that as soon as you see the horse, you see what the horse is doing and that it's eating the clover. Or maybe it runs into a patch of clover, a massive patch of clover. Okay. Then from the clover, imagine whether you want a bunch of clover or one giant clover. Let's say one giant clover. Then let's say it kind of escapes from the horse and then it spits out a ship. The ship emerges from the clover. Okay, and maybe it's still sticking to it a little bit, so that you see the ship and the back of the ship still has clover leaves wrapped around it. Okay, so now you got horse, clover, ship, right? In the same fashion, you can imagine that the top of the ship, the deck of the ship, bursts a house, maybe an old Victorian style house, like out of the Addams Family or the Munsters or something. Uh, and picture the boards splitting, maybe hear the sound, see the house, very clearly, and try to see the ship and the house at the same time. Okay. From the house, now out of the roof of the house grows a tree. Okay. Busts through the roof, maybe wraps around the house and grows up towards the sky. Poof. It blossoms. Trees don't blossom. It explodes into many, many branches of leaves, maybe all sorts of autumn colors, or you can imagine it bright green. Okay, see it moving and maybe hear the wind and the leaves. Okay, so if you've done that, you probably have a good connection between the rider, the clover, the ship, the house, and the tree. And we're still doing okay on time, so I'm going to add to that to show you how powerful this technique is. um, there's memory competitions out there, by the way, and memory athletes is something that's been around for about a decade. And this is one of the techniques that they use the most, is this chaining technique. So out of the tree comes clouds. So imagine the top of the tree, the canopy of the tree, and then out of that starts to come white fluffy clouds. Or maybe it's better if they're storm clouds. Okay, angry storm clouds coming up out of the tree. Maybe the leaves are coming off of the tree and going up into this angry cloud, and there's lightning, and the lightning strikes the tree, so you have a connection physically between the tree and the clouds. Then it gets weirder, because out of these storm clouds, if you picture them with the lightning, get a good image of those clouds, maybe two clouds kind of nested together with lightning and flashing. Okay. Then out of that, snakes. Snakes start to come out of the cloud and either fly in the air, or being very Fortean, snakes raining out of the cloud. Hundreds and thousands of snakes coming out of the cloud while it's lightning and storming. Okay. Making this big pile of snakes. Okay. Then out of the snakes, they're wrapping around this coffin that emerges. And again, it needs to be a big, strange Gothic coffin, maybe hear it opening, and see it, maybe smell the wood of the coffin. You could maybe even picture a vampire inside or a mummy inside, something that helps you remember it's a coffin. Okay. So out of the snakes, wrapping around, coffin comes up. All right. That gets us from 1 to 8. Okay. So I'm going to run through those real quick again. The rider, right? The horse eating the clover. From the clover comes a ship. From the ship the deck comes a house. Out of the house, the top of the house, a tree. From the top of the tree emerges a cloud or clouds, rain, snakes. From the middle of the snakes comes the coffin. I could go on, and you'd probably absolutely fine, but we don't want to take forever. So I want to see if somebody, first of all, just check yourself. Can you run through and see that? And because while you know the cards, you may not have had them in order. I don't know. You may know them very, very well, and you could remember these cards in order. But can you do it backwards? Can you start with coffin and trace it back and recite the cards from 8 to 1 in your mind? Okay. Any trouble with that? All right. So if you can maybe see that you really, in a short amount of time, could do all 36 cards, and you could run through them forward and backward. And so if you're talking about the cards, you want to make sure that you get them covered. Or if you're, I don't know, whatever you might be doing, and you need to have the whole scope of the entire deck in your mind, this is a really quick and easy way to do it. And it will tend to stay pretty permanently. Okay. Every now and then you might want to refresh it, and there might be what I call breaks in the chain. Like after clouds, you just can't remember snakes. It just doesn't work, or you can't remember that clouds coming out of the tree. You get to the tree, and then you can't remember, and somehow you get to snakes. Go back and refresh those connections, make it more vivid, or change it a little bit. Maybe the top of the tree starts to change into clouds, or the tree becomes a whole forest that is encompassed in cloud, or what, or tree or clouds come out of the trunk of the tree. Whatever image works better for you. And if you find through practice, it's very hard when you're forming the images to know which ones are going to stick really well and which ones won't. But when you're using and you find that there's a gap, go back through and change the image, massage it, make it more vivid, make it more ridiculous, make it funny, make it big, make a bunch, and then you'll close those gaps, and so your chain will be healed, if you will. Okay. Association. Now this is going to be kind of a mini version of the chain technique. But what this is about is you take a single card and you don't know are there any, let's say it this way, are there any cards for which it's difficult to remember the meaning? You have difficulty remembering what they're really all about, or a keyword, or are they just all pretty much known to you at this point? Any volunteering of any information?
The bouquet for me always gets me.
Bouquet. So gift or happiness. Okay. So let's work with that one. So first of all, picture a bouquet in your mind as clearly as you can. Now I've noticed that sometimes when there's fiddly bits, fuzzy bits, like multiple flowers, the mind doesn't make a real clear picture of like lots of flowers. How many flowers? So let's imagine our bouquet has maybe three red roses, because it's easy to imagine that. It's difficult to imagine, you know, 3 white lilies and 2 orange roses and some baby's breath and some grass, and it just okay. So imagine, and make it real simple. Make the wrap of the bouquet like a, let's make it blue. It doesn't really matter a whole lot, but picture a nice opaque conical wrap. Okay, and out of that is 3 red roses. That's your bouquet. Okay, make whatever bouquet you want, but the more you can picture it, the better it is. Now picture the roses being fantastically large and full, voluptuous roses. Okay, and maybe see them, smell them. So first of all, get a really good clear picture in your mind of a bouquet. Okay, you can try using the card. If you want to associate it with the card, you can look at the card and try to either recreate that bouquet in your mind or picture the card itself and something happening. But it might be good to have a bouquet in your mind. Then you can read from different decks with no trouble. Now to that image, that is the card, you're going to associate the meanings. We have 2 listed here. Okay, gift and happiness. Okay, these will perfectly illustrate the 2 things that you'll really need to know about associating meanings to something. One is to epitomize whatever the meaning is, you get the epitome of it. So gift, a cartoon, standard, iconic gift. You probably already pull it up in your mind. Like if you're typing gift in your phone and it gives you the option for a little emoji, right? You're doing kind of the same thing. What do you picture as gift? So picture like a yellow package with red ribbon around it with a big red bow on top. And that's a gift. Now you have to associate that with the bouquet. So either the bouquet is springing out of that, or maybe the other way around. One of the imagine the roses are buds in the bud stage, and then one opens, and then the other opens, poof, poof, and then the third one goes poof, and there's a gift. You get a gift with your bouquet. Every bouquet comes with a gift. Within every single bouquet that you buy in the store, a gift will pop out. This is a crazy imaginary world, okay? Just saying something really stupid and strange like that will probably help you. Imagine you walk into the florist or Kroger's or something, and then you're shocked that every single bouquet there has a gift that's associated with it. You get for free, okay? So imagine a sort of icon, if you can, if it's something really easy to represent, like a gift. Okay, happiness is a little bit different. It's more abstract. So you want to substitute something for that. Here again is epitomizing, okay? So maybe a smiley face, but a smiley face is kind of 2-dimensional. You could imagine just a circle, but how about a smiley face balloon? A yellow, mylar, shiny yellow face balloon, and it is wrapped around the bouquet, maybe tied up to the gift, so you'll see them both together. So this rose goes poof, and the gift pops out, and also bobbing up and down right above it, right, tied all around the gift, is a bright shiny yellow smiley face staring at you. And to help it stick, maybe the smiley face talks. The balloon talks and says, "I'm happy," or says, "I represent happiness," because that's weird and strange. Okay. So that will help you lock in those meanings. I'm going to pick one other off the list because it represents another kind of issue. If you go like number 11, the rod or the whip, repetition. So you've never seen a repetition. You've seen things be repeated, but you don't have a repetition. I can't hand you a repetition. Okay. So it's difficult to come up with a kind of icon for that. One thing you can do is called, it's various terms, but substitution. So you could either, of course, as we were saying, come up with something that is repetitive, like maybe a jackhammer would be repetitive. Trying to think of some other things that would be, easily repetitive. You can probably come up with some better than I can. But to replace the word with a sound alike. So repetition, first thing that comes to my mind is reptile, or you could do representative, but a reptile. And then maybe then from reptile, we picture a chameleon and it's changing colors repeatedly. So you kind of double encode that meaning. So reptile, so the chameleon will remind you reptile, which stands for repetition. That may sound like a big stretch, but if you already have looked at the number 11 card, the rod or the whip, and you've read that meaning repetition multiple times, all that memory thing has to do is just kind of push you in that direction a little bit. Okay. It doesn't have to be perfect. You don't have to craft these in a really, really careful manner. It's just enough to get you from A to B. And you're going to find that many times it's easier than it sounds when you first start using these. They can sound pretty complex. Yeah. So it illustrates that. Are there any questions so far or comments or anything? And you can, if you think of one in the next few minutes, you feel free. So to recap, chaining is if you want to, you're not worried about what number in a sequence something is, you're just trying to get the whole sequence. So if you wanted to stick all 36 cards together, you could start at 1 and you could go all the way through. Another thing that it's useful for is if you wanted to remember what precedes clouds. You can picture clouds and you can kind of follow it backwards and see tree. Tree comes before clouds. What comes after clouds? Clouds come before snakes. Snakes come after clouds because you can see them, right? So that's another benefit. Association is simply taking something you know and attaching something that you want to remember to it. And you create 2 visual images, or 3 if there's multiple meanings, and you stick them together. That's an important part, okay? If you just picture them side by side, or you think of one, you think of the other, that's not really going to do it so well. Try to really, really make the physical connection between the things that you're trying to associate. So with that bouquet, don't remember on a table and a bouquet and a gift beside it. First of all, that's very normal, and that's a very forgettable image. So clear image of the bouquet, clear image of the present, but something shocking should happen, or interesting or funny should happen, and it should be connected. So the bouquet is, the gift comes out of the bouquet, and so does the balloon. So they're right there, okay? So the next thing is the peg technique. And if you can go to the next slide. All right. Now this system is more work up front. Okay. You shouldn't expect that you're going to memorize all this now. It takes a little memory work up front, but the payoff can be huge once you've started using it. All right. This is, every number has associated with it a sound or a couple sounds that are very similar. Okay. And they're all consonants. So vowels are wild cards. They're free. You can put any vowel with it you want. So that if you can turn numbers into words and vice versa, but it's usually better going from number to word, right? So the sound associated with a 0 is an S or a Z. And all of these that are paired are actually, phonetically speaking, the same sounds. They're just voiced and unvoiced. One would be without a vocal cord being engaged, and then with a vocal cord being engaged, to get an S and a Z. Form the same way except for the sound, the vibration of the vocal cords. True for all of these here. And it has the benefit of either looking like the number in some cases, some of them was a little bit of a stretch, but or sounding like the number, like S and Z, 0 is a Z, okay? So, well, I'll pair it with the next one. So 1 is a T or a D, t or D or D. So you could think of a tie, TIE, necktie, or a toe, TOE, or even TOW, because W is not up here, okay? Like a tow truck or something. It's going to represent that number and vice versa. How that's used is, so for example, card number 1. All right. If you wanted to know the number of the card, you're not just trying to string them together. You want to do something with that number, some information you want to associate with the rider. Okay. Or its position in a spread or something. You can imagine a tow truck representing card number 1, because tow will give you number 1. That's the first card. Okay. The 10th card would be T plus an S, or a T plus a Z, or a D plus an S. So you could have like, and again, it's the sound that's important. So the word dice, I oftentimes use for 10. Even though it's a C, the sound is, it's a D and a S, dice. So you could put like fuzzy dice that people used to hang from their rear view mirrors or something, or big dice, or just one single die, but you know it's dice. Okay, and that would represent the number 10. So the scythe. All right. Um, and then anything you want to do with that card or memorize the position associated with that, you would use this technique. And I believe that could be important if you're going through the houses. Is that what you call it? Yeah. So if you came across the scythe, you would know, you could remember that that's the number 10 card, which the chaining thing won't get you as easily, but the number 10 card you could associate with scythe, and that help you. Go ahead, Dee, if you want to say something.
So I just have a question for you. So if I am thinking about the number 10 card, size, and then I come up with the word dice, then do I use the association technique to combine the dice and the size together so that it
Yes.
locks in that idea that dice is 10 and 10 is the size?
Right. So if dice is your number for 10, and that's where the upfront work happens, to remember to have some kind of image for each of the numerical positions 1 through 36. The number 10 would be dice, and then yes, you picture a scythe coming out of the dice, or the scythe cutting the dice, or maybe partway embedded in the dice, so that anytime you think of dice, you think of the scythe. If you think of the scythe, what is it doing? It's cutting into dice, and that dice equals 10. That's the important part. So the dice and the scythe and the dice. Why the dice? Because it's 10. So if you're going through the houses and you come up on the scythe, you well, instead of having to remember or look at the cards or something, you can know scythe is cutting into a dice is 10. That's the number you need to use, and you start counting 10 from that card. Yeah, so anything below 10, you just use the one number. So for example, 4, the R, row, or doesn't matter if there's only one consonant in it that has an R. So OAR will work, or ROW. I usually picture an or for that. And so for house, you can picture a house that's rowing itself to the water with oars, or lots of oars coming out of the house, or a house made of oars, or house rowing. Okay. Or a row of houses, whatever. And then that will help you remember that house is number 4, and number 4 is house, and so on. I don't want to go too much into that because it might be a little complicated. If I need more explanation, I can certainly add it. Is it clear? I'm not sure it's clear.
I guess, Brent, my question is, I'm having trouble understanding like one and associating with T. The S and the Z for, 0 is pretty clear in terms of the consonant sound with that, and the 4, but what is the M for 3? That's what I'm
Okay. So I think I understand. And if I'm not addressing it, I'll say 2 things. I think I'll address what you're saying. So first of all, 3 equals M means if you're trying to remember something with the number 3, you can replace the M, you can place the 3 with an M to make a word. Okay. Or if something's in the 3rd position, or the 3rd card, which is the ship. Okay. You can remember that the ship is the 3rd card by replacing 3 with a word that starts with M, or just has M plus a consonant, like ma is oftentimes used, ma, like grandma, ma, so like an old lady on a cane or something like that. She can be on the ship or carrying the ship or something.
Or
Associate
math or something.
or the mast, right? Or she's
So-
strapped to the mast or something. So that ma is associated with ship, ship is associated with ma, and ma means 3 because M is 3.
So there's
Okay.
really no, this is the part that, like when you said pre-work, we just have to remember that 3 is M and then to try to relate it. It's not like that's what you're saying.
I
This
think
is a system that is very, very old. There are ways to make this more memorable, like, and I haven't gone through it because it takes a little while, but I'll give you a few more. Like, for example, a way to remember that 3 is M is that if you turn an M on its side, it makes a 3.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So S and Z sound like 0. T looks like the number 1.
Mm-hmm.
2, if you play with it a little, if you turn a 2 this way and you make it angular. As a matter of fact, an old way of writing 2
It's
was like an N
it's
on
like
its side.
a Z, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was like an N on its side, which is a Z. Exactly.
Okay, I understand now.
So 4, the last letter in 4, you can exaggerate it. So it works like that. L is also weird. The top of a 5, you make it L.
Mm-hmm.
The bottom of the L becomes the top of the 5 is a way to remember that. Yeah. So, and 9 looks like a P. Like F and V for 8, a little bit harder. You just have to kind of remember that one, you
Okay.
know. So
Cool.
you have
Thank
to play around, and you can find this online too. This is pretty common now. But yeah, once you start to associate sounds with the numbers, then it's really good for passwords, that kind of stuff. If you need a pin for your charge card or something like that, 4 digits, it's not too hard to take 4 digits and turn them into some kind of word. Let's say your pin number is anything 21. I'll just make up one 2103. So not Sam, right? 2 is an N, T is or 1 is a T. So you say not, and then I said 2103. Yeah, 03 is Sam, not Sam. You could probably get more creative and make one single word if you look long enough, but you know, oftentimes that'll get you through whatever you need to do. Like if somebody's giving you a number real quick, last 4 digits of a phone number, your social security number or something like that, it's enough, you know. I remember my pass code from like the year 1998. It was links. Doesn't do any good now because that account's closed, but you know, yeah, so it works if you give it the time up front. So the payoff is big, but it requires a little more upfront work, as opposed to like the chaining technique, which you don't have to know anything, you can just do it. Okay. Yes.
Just out of curiosity, is this the technique you were using when you were doing the license plate thing?
I was trying to yes, I was using that, but I was also trying to improve my eidetic memory, just trying to photograph and see just a picture. I'm trying to make a picture out of the letters and numbers. But yeah, I was you have to be pretty fast, but yeah, if you know it really, really well, you can memorize license plates and stuff like that. But those have letters in there as well, and the technique for remembering letters, which doesn't apply to Lenormand what we're doing, but is you come up with an animal or a fruit that has the same starting letter. So A, alligator or ape, B, bear, C, cat, D, dog, right? Yeah.
Yeah, y'all, there was a time period where he would drive across town and then call me and tell me all the license plate numbers he saw.
Yeah, I forgot about
It was
that.
wild.
I could get to like 7 or 10 at one point.
Wow.
Yeah. But yeah, and the serial numbers on trucks and stuff, but doesn't really help. I mean, it wasn't useful.
Yeah, but it was good
But
practice.
it is, and it trains you to handle things. And I have gotten to where I can look at a customer's phone number, and I don't try to commit it to permanent memory in most cases. But I hold it in my head long enough that I can make the call later that day or something like that. And some of them I do, like extensions. If it's somebody I definitely want to call, yeah, I will go ahead and commit that to memory. But what's interesting is it forces you to focus enough that after a while, a 4-digit number is like a name. You just see it and you tend to remember, you know, house numbers and anything like 4 or 5 digits becomes pretty normal to just see and memorize like a name. But that's the thing, we hear names and we don't really think about it. If the trick, if you write it down, you remember. Part of it is because you're paying attention to every single letter. If you hear the name Steve, you've known lots of Steves, and it comes in one ear and goes out the other, because you think the deceptive thing about it is you think you'll remember because it's very easy, and that's the ones you won't remember. You know, if somebody says my name is Naganjani, you may not know how to spell it, you may not be able to say it back, but if you hear it again, you'll know it's not Steve. Steve, you can forget. You can get Steve mixed up with Bob. You won't get Naganjani mixed up with Steve, right? And if you write out Naganjani and you see yourself write it, you have a picture for it, you had to think about it, it's going to stick more. So it's paying attention is a huge part of this. It teaches you to pay attention the first time. Now, I could go into memory palaces if you think we could or should. You want me?
Well, we got a few, like 7 more minutes. Can you give us a brief overview of how memory palaces work?
Yeah, I'll do that. This is a lot, I know. And this can be useful for memorizing Lenormand or anything. I can think of a number of ways to use it for Lenormand. This is actually how I learned Lenormand, and I haven't refreshed my memory palace for a long time, but I still remember the position of most of the cards from building memory palace. So memory palace is a thing, again, that came from rhetoric, where somebody would give a speech and they would have a number of points they wanted to cover in the speech. And a way to memorize it is super clever. They would walk around a building that they were familiar with, usually a public building that was very large and open so that they could go visit any time and would remain stable, and they would, in pairs or classes or something, walk around the building and make sure that they had memorized many of the details of the building so that they had a picture of it in their head. It's that upfront work. Your house is very well known to you, so it's oftentimes suggested that you can use your house as a memory palace, or your place of work, or something in your neighborhood. It doesn't matter so much as it has places, specific points within that building or within that neighborhood or whatever that you know very well, and that if you were in any one of those points, you would know where you were. So if I blindfolded you and dropped you in one of the rooms of your house, if you took off the blindfold, you'd know where you were and you'd know how to get to the other parts. If you don't know a building that well, then that's kind of like the prerequisite. If I dropped you in the middle of, I don't know, some foreign building.
House.
Yeah, somebody else's house. I'm trying to think 5 buildings. I can't think of the name of any. I can see them. The memory guy here, right? But because they're known to you, it's this idea with all of this stuff of taking what's known and connecting to it something that's unknown, and knowing how to get to it, leaving a clue, leaving some sort of way that you will be able to get back to that remembered thing when you need it. All right. So in making speeches, in their mind, they would walk the building. And the first place they would come to in the building is where they would put something, the association technique, their first argument or the first point of their speech. They would make a picture for it and stick it in the first place. And then mentally go around in the building to the next place, the next room or the next pillar or the next chair or whatever it was. And that would be the second place. And they'd put their second point or argument, somehow represented with a physical thing, there, and so on and so forth. So let's say if you're going to give a discourse on the Greek gods, and in this library, if that's what you've used, that the front door of the library where you walk in, that's where you're going to put your first argument. And the first god you're going to talk about is Zeus. So you put a statue of Zeus standing in the opening of the library. And then maybe there's a second door before you actually enter the proper room of the library, like a double door type thing. And you're going to talk about Hera, his consort. You put Hera in the second place. And then you're going to talk about, maybe there's a chair just inside the second door of the library. It's a reading room or something. That's the third place you've designated. And you're going to talk about Mercury next. So you put a statue of Mercury, or Hermes, I should say, in the third place. This is why even today, people will say, in the first place, we have blah, 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 when you're making the most important argument. And well, in the second place, because it comes from that. Now they would actually go on and say the third place, the fourth place, the fifth place. And why they would do this is because everybody in the room listening to these speeches understood this oratory technique. They were all using it. And so they understood that the speaker is walking through a memory palace, maybe even using the same building that they were. And so it helps them. They've got their own memory palace. Now, the really, really cool thing about this is if I'm giving this speech and you've been to the same library and you have the same library in your head, what I'm telling you is when you go into your first place, that's Zeus. And when you go into your second place, that's Hera. And when you go into your third place, that's Hermes. So you've just copied. I've transferred my speech, the points of my speech into your memory palace. And you forget what I've talked about later. You go, what was the third thing he talked about? Oh, yeah, there's the chairs in the third place. And in that chair is statue of Hermes. And before that, he talked about Hera. And before that, he talked about Zeus. So without notebook, without transcribing texts, an orator could teach a class to students or other philosophers, and they could go home with that speech more or less intact, sometimes word for word. It's a really fascinating thing. So you can do this by picking a building you know well or your home, and within each room, if you can, 10 places. Designate 10 places. The corners are good. Maybe something on the wall of each. So if you start in the place where you are in the room and count that as 1, in the corner 2, and the next wall 3, and then 4, and then 5, 6, 7, 8. And then the middle of the floor can be 9, the ceiling can be 10. I usually put 2 places in the middle of the floor. I have a hard time picturing things sticking out of the ceiling for some reason, because you don't do that much, I guess. I don't know. But so you take a room and you divide it up into 10 places, and then you do 10 places in the next room. Now, if that's weird and you can't think of that many places, just do 5. 5 places will get you a long way. If you've got 5 items to pick up at the grocery, the door of that room, you put the can of soup, and then the corner to your right, maybe there's a table that lives in that corner. You put celery coming out of that table. And then maybe there's a couch past that. And then that's your third place. And you want to buy dog food. So the couch covered in dog food, lots and lots of dog food coming out of the couch. All right. And then, yeah, that's how memory palace works. So it's also called the locus method, or the method of loci, meaning place. And so you just carve out places. You have something in each of those places, not just an empty corner, because one empty corner in your mind will look like every other empty corner in your mind. It's just like we did with the bouquet. You have a thing that you know that lives in that place, and then whatever you want to remember with it, you attach it in some way. Comes out of it, morphs into it, attacks it, something, and make it big and bold and ridiculous. And so I use my old childhood house to remember. Ryder is on a vent in the floor where I used to warm my feet in the winter. And then there's an end table where there's Clover, and then there's a ship on our couch, and then an old ceramic cat that has a house coming out of it, and an organ bench where my mom used to play that has a tree. It opens up and the tree comes out, and so on and so forth. So it works for me. Any thoughts, questions? All right, D.
All right.
If anybody comes up with anything else, that's fine. Later is also fine.
I will
Thanks
say
for that.
early warning. The dogs came and made me let them out, and so they'll probably be whining to be let in right when I'm full steam trying to explain something. So just so you know. But thank you very much, Brent. I always learn something new. I heard you do that a bunch of times and always get new ideas. So
no, it's really cool because I'm kind of realizing that I have my own memory techniques that I've actually established over the years. Like as far as when he was talking about memorizing names, I actually equate it to, like, if I meet somebody new, I try to equate the new name with somebody that I remember from childhood,
Mm,
childhood
yeah,
friends,
yeah.
and then I match
So
them.
it's that principle, and so that's a really good one. It's the same. It's what's interesting. If you examine the things that have worked with you over time, you'll probably find that they employ some of those same principles. And one of them is something you know very well, and you attach something you don't know to it. So you knew a Chris before. I do the same thing, by the way. I had one of my early childhood friends was a Chris, and I see that name. When I hear that name, I see his face,
Yeah.
and so I make that association. Yeah.
All right.
Repetition is another one, and
Yeah.
paying attention the first time is huge.
Yes.
My dogs are back in. Maybe they'll be quiet. But let me move on to, and again, here are our card keywords. This is the same list that the little QR code should have taken you to. I used to have the QR code also on the slide, but apparently it's not here right now. But, you know, and again, these probably aren't exactly the same as the keywords that you're used to working with, but these are just the ones that I use because anytime I'm talking to a group of people, everyone has slightly different keywords usually when it comes to Lenormand. And if you ask me where these came from, I don't know. It's been a long time. But it's enough to get us through the concepts because I really don't want you to learn the keywords. I want you to learn the concepts of how to interact with the Grand Tableau and get the most out of it. So I will start with saying that there are two different versions of the Grand Tableau, and I will present both to you, but we're going to focus on one in particular because I think it is more useful the way it's laid out than the other. And I will just say that it is really ironic to me that I am even talking about the Grand Tableau because from the very first moment I saw it, I went, that's freaking ridiculous. That's all the cards in the deck. How could this ever be useful? When I was like 16 years old, I just was totally offended by the idea of using every single card in the deck in order to do anything. But once you learn these techniques, you'll start to see how putting every single card out on the table can be very, very useful. So this is the first way you can lay out a Grand Tableau, and it's very simple because it's not 9 cards, four rows of 9 cards. And though it is very simple to lay this out, this is the one I find least useful. And I will show you the other traditional way to lay out a Grand Tableau, and that's 8 by 4 plus 4, which starts to sound like a math problem, but it's 8 cards in 4 rows, and then the 4 extra cards are in the center at the bottom. And this is the one that I'm going to spend the time talking about today. Now, a lot of the things that I'm going to tell you about can be easily applied to the 9 by 4 grid also, but I think that once you see some things that you can do with the 8 by 4 grid, I think that you'll see why it's more useful. And the first thing I want to do when talking about the 8 by 4 by 4 plus 4 grid is talking about different regions of the Grand Tableau and what they can tell you about a reading. So somebody sits down across from you and they ask for a general reading, for example, which is sometimes the dread of every card reader. It's like, can you not give me something specific to focus on? But if they ask for a general reading, I used to think the worst thing I could do is lay out a Grand Tableau because it's just, it's everything all out there on the table. And how do you focus? But there are some key parts of the Grand Tableau, and you can learn a lot from them, even in a general reading. And the first part that you can look at is called the center, or literally the crux of the matter, because it makes like a little cross in the center of the grid. And that's these 4 cards in the very center. And what these cards will tell you if you read them in conjunction with each other is really the heart of the situation. So if you're doing a general reading for somebody and you see things like the anchor and the house, and the stars and the ship, you start to get an idea of, well, what might this reading be about? You could look at maybe it's concerning ideas about stability of the home. And maybe since the stars are there, and the stars can mean like, kind of desire, destiny, and the ship's there, movement. Well, maybe the home's a little too stable, and maybe someone's desiring a little bit of movement or action or activity, or they want to move homes, or maybe they have this wish to move on to something different. So that can start to build up a picture for you, even in general reading, about what's going on. So that is the center. That is the crux of the matter. Now, as a professional card reading, the next 4 cards are my favorite. And that's the pin cards, also known as the person's coping mechanism. I use these cards a lot for general readings, but I also use them when the person asking the question asks something, and sometimes you get that idea that maybe they're not telling you everything, or maybe that's not really what's foremost on their mind. Go to the pin cards and read the pin cards. You don't even have to tell the person you're reading for what you're reading. You can just glance at them and go, well, does that line up with what they're asking about, or is it talking about something completely different? So, in this example, it's the letter, the cross, the tower, and the coffin. And so if somebody says, I want a reading about my love life, but the pin cards are telling me about paperwork, crosses to bear, difficulties, legalities, formalities, boundaries, and endings, perhaps their love life isn't going so well, and they already know. And so maybe they're more interested in, what's wrong with their love life, rather than, how they're going to build a better, greater relationship with their partner. Their relationship may be on the skids, but they don't really want to say so. But the pin cards are kind of giving you a hint that there's more to the story there, other than just what's presented in the question, because there's always more to the story. The third section is the top row. If someone is seeking information about things on a spiritual level, that's the row that you go to. And as you can imagine, the bottom row is the material level. So you have the spiritual plane up on the very top row, you have the material plane on the middle row, and then I usually make the second row the emotional stuff, and the third row the intellectual stuff. I spend a lot of time splitting my Lenormand data into multiple rows or into multiple levels.
Dee, could you repeat that again? I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, yeah, sure. So the top row at the very top is the spiritual level. The second row would be the emotional. The third would be the intellectual or mental level. And then the fourth row is kind of the material level. And I have a dog, I swear I have a dog trying to get into my lap. Whoa, and he just almost knocked me over. So pardon me while I have a dog. All right. So those are the rows. And if you take a look at the columns, the far left column is the past. Past events, very strong influences on future occurrences or current occurrences are all in that left-hand row. Or column, I should say. And then on the far right-hand column is the future, but it's the future that the client sees. So it may not necessarily be the hard and fast outcome to a reading, but it is the future that the client can envision. It might be their hopes, it might be their fears, It might just be what they logically think's going to be the outcome of where they are. And then finally, for the verdict, for the true outcome, you look at those 4 oddball cards down at the bottom. You read them in conjunction to come out with a final resolution if someone is seeking a final resolution in the question that they ask you. So you can see you can mix and match these sections of the reading to break it up into more bite-sized pieces, which allow you to put together a coherent story to tell someone that you're doing a reading for, even if they don't have a coherent question to ask. You know, you can, if it's a general reading, you can start out with those 4 cards in the center and talk about them, and that may lead to other questions or them wanting clarification on different aspects of what you see from the 4 cards in the center, and then you can move on from there. And of course, with all of these cards, you can use all of the typical Lenormand techniques by, you know, pairing them, looking at cards on the diagonal and pairing them that way, looking at cards that are touching versus cards that aren't touching, and get a better picture of the situation. So when you're presented with a grand tableau and you really just don't know where to start, you can start in one of these places. Any questions about these different areas of the grand tableau?
Hey Dee, so you mentioned the far left is the past, and the far right could be hopes, fears, or expectations, or whatever. Do you pick a center for the present, or kind of framing what their hopes and dreams would be, or how that shapes what they may be?
So let me make sure I understand the question correctly. Is the question, when you look at the column, how do you pick the center, or is it?
Do you pick? You only mentioned the past and their future. You didn't mention the present and the potential of that influence, right? So is it the
Right.
central column or the center two? You know, that type
It is the center 2, and then the far left is past, but those as you
move.
that's as far back as you go, and then as you move to the left, you get further into the past. And same with far right. So you can look at the very 2 center columns as right now. You can look at these 2 columns as what's coming in the near future, and then this final column as the far future or the furthest future. And the same as the past. You can look at these 2 columns as the near past, and then this left-hand column as the far past. And notice that when you're working with the near past, you have more information. When you're working with the near future, you have more information. Then when you get out to the far past and the far future, you're working with less info. You're seeing broader strokes and probably more influential or impactful experiences that have left kind of an indelible mark, for example, in the past. And then in the future, you're looking at things that are big things that the person sees on the horizon.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you for the question. That was a good one. Any other questions about the regions?
And so when you look at these, so someone says, hey, I just want to know generally about my, my future, whatever. And you read your 4 center ones. Are you, I mean, I know you did the centers, but let's take the far left as the broader stroke, out there, what kind of shaping. Do you look at those and say, and you look at the 4, it's kind of like what I do in tarot, you look at kind of overview and you've already got a sense, or are you really reading them like a Lenormand? Are you doing top to bottom and the influences of the card, you know, are you reading them in a narrative, or are you just saying, yeah, these four are telling me that, you know, I can't see the top one. I've got my old glasses on, but you know, the key to, you know, the cross that they're bearing is blah, blah, blah. I mean, are you combining it like that?
Yes.
As a general statement? Okay.
I'm looking at the, you know, I'm pairing the cards in various ways to kind of see what they're telling me about that area of the person's experience. So, you know, if I'm looking at the past, we have the letter and the key. I would combine those. The key and the moon, I would combine those. The moon and the cross, I would combine those, since they're all touched, you know, each pair's touching each other. Okay. And then make an, you know, interpretation of those three concepts and kind of put them together into a narrative for the person.
Do you use a 9-card spread? Like, I've seen where people refer to, like, hey, I want to know about my health. So like they go around the tree and they read all the cards around the tree, like a 9-card spread. I mean, the tree isn't, you know, all the way down, but do you do that as well in the reading? Okay, so if you ask about like my marriage, so they go over to like the ring and then they read all the cards around the ring, like a card spread. Do you do that as part of a general reading too?
Yes. So I'm going to be, this technique and some of the other techniques I'm going to be sharing with you could all be applied to general or specific readings. And so this is a good place to start for general reading, but you can also use it for specific questions. So what I might do is, if I lay this out, if somebody says to me, if Brent says to me, I want to know about my love life, and I go, okay, and these cards come out, I may look at these cards in the center to get a general overview, just the atmosphere of what's going on with the love life. And then I'll go to the ring and I'll observe what is around the ring and read those cards in conjunction to get more specific. So here's in general what's going on in Brent's life, but also here's specifically what's going on in Brent's love life. I know all and see all. But yeah, so and we'll talk about using cards for different topics with some of the other techniques that are coming up. But yeah, you can use these techniques for general readings. You can use them for specific readings, any of them.
And what would constitute, because you know, when I was learning from Lazi, I don't know if I can mention that here, but when I learned from her, she was saying about how there's kind of like a protocol of, you know, if you're doing, like, if you just want to know what's going on daily, maybe 3 cards, 5 cards, no more. If you want to, you know, something, a little more insight, like, so she was kind of equating the size of the spread to the scope of the question. And she was saying more of leaving the Grand Tableau for something where you wanted to do like a year out overview or something like that. Is that just her way of doing it, or is it something, you know, that you can just
I think that that's an interesting way to look at it, and I think that you can definitely do that. I don't really limit my reading by time scale so much as I do complexity. You know, so if a friend comes to me and says, hey, I just kind of want to know what's going on in my life, I might just do a 3 or 5 card layout of, you know, 5 cards in a row and give them a reading. If a client comes to me weeping because they're confused and they don't know what to do with their life, I'll do a Grand Tableau, because I'm assuming 2 things. One, I'm assuming that they're going to have a fairly complex situation to talk to because they're in distress. But the other is because you can lay out a Grand Tableau for someone and then answer multiple questions from the same reading without picking up reshuffling and redealing, which I really like when I'm doing professional readings for people, because we spend less time manipulating the cards and we spend more time reading the cards and finding answers that way.
I agree.
So,
And that's the thing, because it's kind of like, you know, when I heard that, it was confusing to me, because it's like, okay, well, when do I pull the trigger and do a grand tableau? You know?
And, you know, and I think a lot of times when people say that, they're saying guidelines that can help you, you know, but they're always guidelines, you know, they're what we've been watching Pirates of the Caribbean. It's more guidelines than a code, right? So you have a general, you know, way to approach your readings, but I mean, I use the heck out of the Grand Tableau now that I know some of these techniques, and I love the fact that I could sit down and do an hour reading with someone, and we shuffle and cut and prep the cards once, and we spend the rest of the time talking, without having to do a lot of manipulation of the cards. I really like that. So
Yeah.
anytime I talk to people who plan on using Lenormand for professional stuff, I'm like, you know, get real comfortable with the Grand Tableau. But also, Brent and I were dealing with a complex situation. God, was that only last night? And the Grand Tableau came out because I knew we were going to want to look at the situation from multiple different aspects, not just one, you know, a 1-to-1 ratio of here's a reading, here's the response of the cards, but I knew we were going to want to look at it multiple ways.
So Brent, I have this question for you, since you're more familiar with tarot. I've seen other tarot readers do all 78 in a Grand Tableau in the tarot, which blows my mind. I mean, you know, I'll do a 12 to 16 maybe card, but you know, is that a kind of a general approach? You know, Dee's philosophy being that, you know, the Grand Tableau, now that you know the techniques, let's get it on the table so we aren't pulling, you know, aspecting cards or clarification cards. I mean, have you ever found that to be true in tarot? Where
Not in your life.
I can't imagine it either, but I had to ask you. I've only been doing tarot for maybe 3 or 4 years, but been around it for 30 plus.
Well, so you know, I've been at it, let's say 25, 26 years. She's been at it 38, you know,
Oh,
something like that. For tarot too. So
for tarot too.
yeah.
Oh, I didn't know. I thought you were more the Lenormand. So.
And I
no,
started
that's where she's.
Yeah, I started with tarot when I was 11. I started with Lenormand when I was 16.
Yeah, I did tarot like
15.
13 and then put it away for 30 years. Yeah, I just can't imagine. I mean, it's hard enough, especially, and I've never done Lenormand, to think 36 cards is just overwhelming to you know, these techniques are excellent, by the way, but to pull 78 cards and put, first of all, I'd have to find a 12 by 15 area. You know.
You get small cards, mini cards. There are those, and I use those.
Yes, I have some.
Yeah, even for normal readings, because space is a thing. But no, it's not just. This is Dee can probably say a bunch more, but for me, it's not just the volume of the cards. There definitely is that.
Yeah.
But Lenormand is more structured for
this.
that
Yes.
type of thing. Yeah, there's nothing in
Absolutely.
tarot that, you know, that is like going through the houses or the corner stuff where there's patterns and that one card leads you to another card and so on and so forth. I don't know. We've looked at a lot of tarot stuff, and I've never seen anything like that surface in the tarot tradition.
You know,
So,
I there's one reader I follow, and when I first got into it, and he actually overlays the major arcana as the houses, right? So you'll have the Fool, and then you'll have the High Priestess, and you know, and the Empress and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, I just thought I'd ask, and I thought, well, if they're doing 78 card reads on a Grand Tableau on the tarot,
I will
no, because
say,
if I'd done a 78 card spread, I would still be reading it.
exactly. From 25.
I'd still be involved in that spread. Yeah.
Exactly.
So, go ahead, Dee.
I was just gonna say, here's my tarot deck of choice. It is way oversized. And when when I was 13, 14, we moved into a new house, and we had this huge living room that my parents didn't have furniture for. And I did have a little white book that explained a 78 card horseshoe spread, which I had never seen before because there was never room
Horseshoe.
for it.
No.
So I got on the living room floor and I laid out a 78 card horseshoe spread with these Gigundo cards and spent a happy couple of hours walking over, getting a lower backache, walking around looking at these different cards, which another thought was absolutely hilarious. But as Brent said, the most, I think, important thing to realize is that tarot has a different technique altogether of reading and
Yes.
interpreting the cards. And there's just literally, there's an esoteric concept that this is the universe. All 78 cards come together and they create the known and unknown universe and everything in it. And so if that is the case, and you lay all 78 cards in a spread, how in the hell do you pinpoint? Because they're just, no, I think it's insane. That's what I'm going to say about that. Come at me, other tarot readers who see
No,
this.
that's okay.
I will argue.
I just had to ask because I mean I find this very daunting. But again, I'm new to Lenormand, 6 months now, maybe. So
You're gonna love it. We're gonna get through some other techniques. You're just gonna love it. Let me hop on to specific questions. This is something that Nicole's question alluded to a little bit. And so if we want to do a reading about specific questions, this is where your significator card comes in. And a lot of times when we do readings about romantic relationships, we're going to be looking for the gentleman card and the lady card and see how they are, like what position they take to each other and to other cards in the spread. And so I have laid out this example as if a man was asking, again, I don't know why I'm picking on men, but as a guy asking about his romantic prospects with somebody. And so the very first thing is to identify the client's card and the love interest card and check their relative position in the spread. So we've got all 36 cards out here, but we need a starting point. And you can either, these days I ask the person I'm reading for what card they want to be represented by. And they can pick the man card, they can pick the woman card. And then some people don't want to identify with either of those. And I say, feel free, pick any of these 36 cards to represent you. And there's some complexities with that. Because, like, if somebody picks the book, you have to now remember that the male or the female card is now really the book when you're doing the reading. But let's table that for a minute and just think, if there is someone who identifies as male, they have a female love interest and they're asking about it. So first I look for the two cards, the gentleman and the lady, and I'm going to check out their relative position. And I'm going to look at a couple things. First, I'm going to see how far apart they are. If Mr. Love Interest is way over here in the first row or the first column, and Miss Love Interest is way over here in the last column, there is a whole lot for those two people to get through before they get together, if they get together. And it depends on the cards that are intervening between them. In this situation that's on this spread, there's only one card really between them, or two, depending on how you look at the card. So that's pretty good. If the gentleman is asking about the lady, that's pretty obvious because the gentleman card is facing the lady card. But note that the lady card is not facing the gentleman card. So there is a good chance that she might not know he even exists as a romantic prospect at this point in time. Her attention is turned elsewhere. Her attention is not turned towards him, but his attention is turned toward her. So he wants to know about his love interest. I want to know about his love interest and see what is her situation right now. So I'm going to be checking the cards around her. Now, Nicole mentioned you can do the whole square surrounding the target card. Depending on what I find and how clear the information is, I may do the whole square, or I may just take a look at part of the cards that are surrounding her. Now, the most interesting thing about her is that she is right next to the card representing romantic feelings and emotions, but her back's turned to it. So to me, that's like, oh, that might be a problem, because she has recently turned her back on her romantic life. And not only that, but there's the moon here. And the moon can often represent fortune or destiny. And so here we are looking at going, oh God, she's just turned her back on what she probably thought was the love of her life, like the person she was destined to be with forever. And her back is turned to that. So she could be coming out of a fairly unfortunate romantic situation and not at all be prepared to, embark on yet another one. So I look at some other cards. If she's got her back turned to love, and if her fated romance wasn't all that it was cracked up to be, well, let's look and see what she's pointed towards. And she's pointed towards the stars and the ship. So it really is a story of her just wanting to leave her past behind. She wants to find something new. She wants to move away from whatever she has experienced. And, she wants to rechart her course, basically. So that's an interesting story. And our gentleman up here on the top row has quite the challenge for him, because, she is self-directed and she's gone through some probably difficult things, but she's just decided to move on. So I'm going to look at the cards that are in between them and see what I can find. And I find a fish, which can be resources or wealth or work. I can find a child, which can be youth or newness. And because it is such a powerful card, even though it's not between them, there's the anchor over here, and it's the best card in the deck, and it's right there, very close to her, not too far from him. So I'm going to look at it. And it's, of course, hope and stability. And we can put those together and we can tell a story, and we can say to this guy, here's some ways. First of all, it's not going to be easy. It's going to take effort. The fish are there. Work is there. If you're really interested in this person, you want to build something with them, then you're going to have to put forth the effort. And what you're going to have to do is that work's going to be showing her something new. And working on building something new that can kind of rekindle her hope or her faith, because the anchor can also represent faith, in having a close relationship again. So this is not a fast path to a new relationship for this guy. This is effort and kind of showing her that things can be reborn anew and rekindling that feeling of hope. Now, another way that you can look at it too is that he can act as a resource for her and provide her with newness, new experiences that will also help her. So it seems as though his path is building a friendship first and building a close relationship on a platonic level that may eventually blossom and grow into a romantic relationship, more so than just, hey, honey, let's jump right into the romance, because she's turned her back on that for the foreseeable future based on her past experiences. So this is how you can start to construct readings for individual questions for someone based off the Grand Tableau. We're not looking at all of the 36 cards. We're looking at the cards that are specifically related to the topic cards that are related to our question. Now, you can also look out and see, and I don't have these highlighted like I do these other cards, but just for an example, there's a ring card out in her future. eventually she might be interested in another, emotional union with somebody, but it's going to be heavily influenced by, again, her past, her experience. She might be a little bit jaded because the lily is directly above the ring. So she would be going into another close relationship with open eyes and very aware. But if the same person then said, well, okay, that's interesting, and I am interested in this woman, but now I want to know something about my career, then I could pick one of the cards that represent career, and we could look at those cards and see. And if you talk to every Lenormand reader you talk to picks different cards to represent different types of careers. I pick the fox a lot of the time to represent entrepreneurship, and I pick the anchor to represent your bread and butter job that puts money on the table. But I've heard people reverse that and do all kinds of interesting things. But if the person was an entrepreneur, we'd grab the fox card, and then we'd look and see that the sun and the lily and the ring and the clover and the coffin are all around that fox card. And we would build an interpretation with those cards. So when it comes to the Grand Tableau, you can get very, very specific on individual questions, and you can answer multiple questions using the same spread of cards. Any questions? I feel like I have just flown through that. Any questions or any clarification?
Well, I'm assuming, so, you've got the client there and okay, yeah, thank you for my love life. And you said going on to now, what's my career, my work life going to look like? So if you pick the fox, for instance, for work, you would do the same technique you just described. You'd want to take a look at, would you look at how far away he is from the fox, for instance, to see, or look around the fox, or how would you then start tackling? I mean, to me, it seems very good with the woman because that's a love interest, but you've only, you know what I mean? So
for that situation, I was looking at him and the woman to judge their like emotional closeness versus their emotional distance, or sometimes even physical closeness versus distance. If he's asking about his career, I figure he's doing it. So I don't have to necessarily see how far away he is from the fox and include that in the reading, unless maybe he says, I don't know if my heart's in it anymore. And then I might go, ooh, well, how far away is he from his career card? And what cards are in between him and the fox? What's getting in the way of him feeling as though he can really fully engage with his career versus what might be helping him? And when you get into concepts like that, you also get into concepts like, I don't know if you guys know of the night jump pattern for overcoming obstacles.
No.
So it's like
igniting.
I don't know. So the method I know is that let's take, that would be a bad example. It'd be like, let's take the dog and the snake, and there's a mountain between them. So how could they circumvent that mountain and get together? But the idea is if there is an obstacle, of course, let me get to my previous slide because I clicked when I shouldn't have clicked.
I was going to say the mountain could be the stretch of I-65 between Nashville and Louisville.
Yes, it could.
That's always
gentlemen.
bad. I hate that stretch.
So I'm trying to think of, say the mountain was like here. So if the gentleman's trying to make his most direct path to the lady, and there's just a gigantic obstacle in his way, then you look at the cards in the night jumps pattern to see how he gets around that obstacle. So you can either, go 1 to the side and 2 down and say, writing, letters, documentation, maybe communication is the key to, your destined fate with this lady. So you better up your love poem game, and you better be pretty, clear in your intentions, and maybe learn to communicate not just verbally. Or you could take the knight's jump the other way and go, oh, well, wait a minute. There's an obstacle. It's has something to do with the scythe and the child. So that could, on a very physical plane thing, mean maybe he had a vasectomy and maybe she wants kids real bad. And so Brent's laughing. Don't laugh. This is how Lenormand works, you jerk.
It could, yeah.
What are you thinking?
That's quite a it's thinking
Just
a
get
number of
out.
things, how literal it is, but also that's quite a surgical instrument.
That's how Lenormand
Or it
works.
could be, or it could be a child with a scythe, and I
It
would
could
not
be a
go
child
through
with a
that.
scythe chasing him, or might be the solution.
Or
So
threatening a vasectomy.
you take that pattern of either 2 across and 1 down, or 1 across and 2 down, and it gives you a way to circumvent an obstacle.
Okay, yeah, I've never heard it used like that, so cool.
Any other questions? If not, we're moving on to going around the houses. This is what made me fall in love with Grand Tableau 100%. This can be a very simple or a very complicated method, but we'll start out with in Lenormand, what is a house? And if you know astrology, delete that from your mind, at least for the time being, because it has nothing to do with astrological houses. If you take your Lenormand deck and you lay it out in order from 1 to 36 in the pattern of the Grand Tableau, those are the houses for the Grand Tableau. So this upper left-hand corner card is house 1 and belongs to the rider. The next card over is house 2 and belongs to the clover, etc. And it goes all the way down to house 36, the cross. The house is an influence, atmosphere, area of interest that falls on the card that lands in that house. So the energy represented, anything that lands in house 1 will be influenced by the energy of the rider. Even though the rider card is not there, the rider card is somewhere else off in the Grand Tableau. The rider card, the concepts that are associated with the rider card influences any card that falls in that position. You can also have the case, 2 special cases. One is occasionally the rider card will land in its own house, and just consider that the rider card times 10, and that it has a very strong influence on the cards around it because it is being reinforced by being in its same house. Another thing that is very interesting is you can have reciprocal cards, which is 2 cards that share each other's houses. So as an example for that, card 24, if that lands in the house of the lady, and card 29 lands in house 24, which is the house of the heart, then that sets up a very important energetic pattern in the reading that is going to strengthen those 2 cards and their influence on each other, even though they're pretty far apart. And it affects the cards that fall between them. So this is where learning really well what number is associated with what card helps. Particularly so this is just concepts that support going around the houses. Going around the houses is actually a whole other story. And one helpful hint I use with this is at least it helps me, is I use the phrase lies within or is in the house of to help me figure out what the heck's going on. Because what's happening now is that even if you're just talking about 2 cards, you're talking about the influences really of 4, because you're talking about each card and the house that it's in. So I like to figure out the combination of the card in its house first, and then the combination of the next card in its house, and then pair those altered combinations together. I know that might sound like gibberish, but we're going to go through an example together in detail that will help us understand how to do it. But for just some basic examples, if the key card is in the book, the house of the book, house 26, well, we know the key is about certainty and about opening. We know that the book is about knowledge and secrets. We can combine those 2 ideas and go, oh, you will not have certainty about this topic until something is revealed to you. There is something being concealed, something needs to be revealed to you in order for you to have certainty and know exactly what you want to do. So it's very similar to just pairing 2 cards together, but it's a little bit different because I think to me, it seems a little bit more, I don't know, an atmosphere or a prevailing energy more than just direct combination of 2 cards. Another example, we'll use the heart again. If the heart is in the house of the child, and the heart is emotions and romance, and the child is youth and new beginnings, then, if somebody's saying, hey, is my lover going to come back to me or stay with their new partner? Guess what? Her heart lies within the house of the child, the house of what's new and just begun. She's not looking back to the past. So you can use that to add a little bit of flavor and a little bit more detail when you're looking at a particular reading.
Would you still use the other techniques along with this technique?
You can. I don't normally, because the full going around the houses technique is fairly complex, and we're going to do that in just a minute, and I think you'll see why then I don't often.
Okay. And then the question again, like the question I had before, how do you know when to use which technique?
So, to be honest, my method is I go from simple to complex. If somebody has a question and I look at their reading and I can make sense of an answer using simple methods, then that's what I go with. If I look at those simple methods and they don't make any sense to me whatsoever, and I cannot make a coherent picture, then I go on to the next complex method and see. And if that doesn't make any sense to me, I go on to the next complex method and see. And so that pregnant pause you have at the beginning of a reading where you're just looking at all the cards and you're trying to figure out what in the heck is going on. At least for me, when I am pausing like that, I'm going, okay, do these cards make a story that makes sense for this individual? Or, is there some other technique that I need to employ? I will also say that when it comes to going around the houses, a lot of times I will choose specifically, like I am going to lay out a grand tableau so that I can use the going around the houses technique rather than, it being something that I just spontaneously decide to do. So I do start with the simplest and move on to the most complex.
Yeah, because I have a mat that's like this. So I'd have to use the mat with every intention of, you know, having it there just in case.
There are two things. One, there are the mats, and then another thing that I have read about, I have not tried, but I thought was clever, is a friend of mine bought a poker-sized Lenormand deck and a miniature-sized Lenormand deck, the same deck, and would lay the larger ones out in the Grand Tableau in the houses, and then deal out on top of those with the smaller ones in
Yep.
order to have a better idea of what the individual houses were.
I have a deck that I bought that way as well.
I've never tried it. Have you tried it?
No, not yet, but I could see how it would work. Like it's, and I also have other decks that are like Oracle size. So you those, but it becomes
Big.
cumbersome.
Yeah. So my last example before we move on to the full technique is moon in house of the park or the garden, depending on what you call it. You know, the moon's fortune and it turned destiny into dexterity, I think. So there's a typo. Or in the house of the park, or lies within society or the social setting. So again, you can see how you can build a statement out of that and say, you know, if you want to be successful, your fortune lies in, you know, having a very visible role in something or being in the public's eye. So, and it just scrolled me back a bunch, so that's fun. Okay, I'm having technical issues. All right, so let's put it all together and let's go around the houses. So if somebody just asks for a general reading, you can go around the houses for them. Do I normally go around the houses for general reading? No. Again, it's usually when I'm tackling a fairly complex situation. And the very first thing that I do, so if this is a general reading and a lady is asking this question or someone who identifies as a lady, I'm going to start with the lady card. And there she is, card number 29. And she is in the house of the tower. So the lady is in, we can just start with that. The lady's involved in some kind of institution or formal organization, or she is having to deal with a lot of rules and regulations, or, you know, maybe even political maneuverings, because she is in the house of the tower. So this is called going around the houses, because now that we know where the lady card is and the tower card is, our next card that we pay attention to is the tower, and figure out what house it's in. And the tower is in the house of the coffin. So our lady who, let's say we decide she is involved in a complicated, well-established organization, but that organization might be suffering some trouble, some breakdown. It might be drawing to a close, or its way of doing things might be ending. So we're having a structured ending, the death of an organization. So she may feel a little bit at loose ends. So to find out more about that, we move on to the next step. The coffin becomes our next focus, and it's in the house of the moon. So this end is something that's been destined. It's been coming for a long time. She may have seen it coming, or other people in the organization may have seen it coming, maybe kept it a secret. Because the moon is about destiny and she's the topic of this reading, we can reassure her that she needs to go through what she's experiencing with this organization in order to move on to the next phase of her life, move on to the next cycle, and get her feet back on the road of her, you know, her destined path. So we take the moon and we see that it is in the house of the stork. And we think about that, and it's bringing forth either some kind of change or potentially a delivery to her. So she's going to get something from this, you know. And if we ping pong around this reading, you know, again, we see that a lady involved in an organization or structured system that's slowly breaking down, and the breakdown of possibly she could feel like her destiny is breaking down. She thought she knew what she was doing. She was involved in this organization. Now things are changing, but she's going to get something out of it. She may feel as it's a return, as if she's going back to where she was before, so she might feel as though she's not getting something out of it. And the stork is in the house of the anchor, which is good because she's going to get stability. Her faith is going to be renewed. And this entire breakdown is going to bring that to her. The anchor is in the house of the whip. So this renewal is going to be a process. I would read that as saying that the renewal or the restoration of hope is going to have to take place over time. She's going to have to experience multiple events that reassure her that this is a good thing for her. So this is going to be a good time period for her, but probably an anxious time period for her. The whip is in the house of the fish. So she's probably have to work hard to recover, but she will also gain on a financial scale from doing this. So maybe she was tangled, maybe she was working at a place and she ends up getting fired. And after all of this, she finds faith in herself and finds a job that brings her, you know, may challenge her at first, but once she gets her feet under, she starts earning. The fish are in the house of the side, though. So eventually that will come to an end or be severed. Her pipeline of financial success is going to suffer some kind of hit, cut off from her resources. That will encourage her to take another step. So we're seeing really the story of a woman going through several jumps in her life. If this was a question about her career, I would have no doubt of what this picture was, is, you know, one workplace situation breaking down, leading her to a second workplace situation that works for a while, but that eventually she leaves or severs herself from that situation and moves on again. And we know we're at the end when our card points us. Oh, we're not to the end yet. She comes to the mountain. So she moves on, she comes to the mountain, she reaches another obstacle in her journey. And it's the mountain that leads back to her. And we know that we're done with going around the houses because it's come all the way back around to her card. So I got kind of fast and loose there at the end. But I did this mostly to show you kind of just mechanically how it works, how you jump from card to card, and why knowing the card number can be very helpful. Because if you go, oh, wait a minute, the lady's in the house 19, well, which is card 19? So you either have to read the little bubbles, which sometimes can take a while. And for me, it's just faster to actually look for the image of the tower. So it's important for me to understand the numbers and which numbers related to which card. And you'll notice that I did that. And in that situation, the lady is in the house of the tower, but because I just have the two visuals, I'm not really worrying about, you don't have to worry about the underlying house because it's right there in front of you, because you go and find it. You find that card and you pair those two cards together. No matter how far apart they are, it's like they're making a chain. And in the beginning, when I was doing this, I would take the lady card and I would put it outside of the reading, and then find the next card and put it next to the lady card, and then find the next card and put it next to the second card. And I would make just a long chain out of all of the cards in the right order, and then pair them together and go through the reading and create it like that. That was the easiest way for me to learn how to do this technique. Your reading will either end when you reach your origin card, or you might find reciprocal cards. And when you find reciprocal cards, you've hit an end also, because you can't go anywhere else. They just bounce you back and forth between those two cards for an eternity. So you're done with the reading. I have had readings that have nearly consumed all 36 cards, which was not a treat, but it gave me a lot of information. I have also asked a question that I thought was so complex, and it was about me. And I started at the lady card, and I found the corresponding card, and it was in the lady card spot, and I got a 1-card reading, which I really think was the deck going, it's not as complex as you think. You can just, take this little piece of advice and move on with your life. So they can be very brief or they can be very lengthy. But they provide an interesting insight, because it's, to me, it's like, this is the path of fate that will happen without, if you keep just doing what you're doing. If you don't make any changes, this is the natural, obvious course of events that are going to take place. And then you can incorporate, if you wish, additional techniques. We hit that mountain card at the end, and she could go, oh my God, that doesn't sound good. How do I, tell me more about that obstacle? And then you can look at the cards surrounding the mountain card and give further details about that particular part of the chain. And again, all without laying out a new reading or doing anything like that, because you've got it all spread out in front of you. Any questions? There's got to be questions.
Yeah, so Dee, on this one, so in this particular case, you used the lady card because it was questions that your client asked the woman. If you were doing the going around the house, and I'll just pick on work again, this one happened to be about work, and or I'm trying to think, are there any other, I'm going to use the quote, significator card other than the lady or the man, which representing your clients, that you would use and then start that technique? I guess, what is a question that would start the technique without a lady or man card being the focus?
Well, I had a friend of mine that I was doing a reading for, and she's an author, and she wanted to know about the progress of the book that she was working on. And so we started with the book.
Okay. All right.
Because,
great example.
And I was just thinking, I was like, oh, you're kind of self-employed. And she's like, can we just start with the book? And I was like, of course we can start with the book, because
As
that's a really cool way to do it.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Or you could have started with her, I suppose.
Yeah, we could have started with her, but I thought it, and to me now, I'm like, anytime anybody's going to ask me about publishing and writing, we're going to look at the book first. If somebody was asking me about the trip that they were going to go on, I would start with the ship. And so it's not up there. My book's not up there. It is up there. I don't remember if you have a copy of my book or not.
I do.
About the Lenormand one. You do. There's a list of topic cards in there.
Oh, okay. I'll look at that. Yeah.
It is, where is it? Because it killed me to do. It starts on page 23, I think. And there's a whole section that's questions like, it gives you the card, like ship, and then it gives suggested questions that you might use the ship for as the topic card. So, will my trip go well? Should I go on vacation? Where is my momentum taking me? You could start on the ship card. For the stars, what are my hopes? How can I get inspired? Am I on the right path? coffin? What is coming to an end? What should I shut down? What will be reborn? So that kind of gives you an idea. And those are kind of just seed ideas that shouldn't be considered like a hard and fast list, because you can use, you know, your own symbolic associations in your brain to go, oh, this is the question, you know. For all I know, kid you not, my grandpa was a Pisces, and it was I think it must have been, I was very young when I found that out, and it was the first time I think I ever encountered anything about astrological signs. And this idea that he was the fish really, like, just really grabbed my attention when I was a little kid. And so if I was going to ask a question about my grandpa, there's a chance I would start at the fish, just because I've associated fish so heavily with him my entire life, just because of that one event. You know, you may want to know about a friend, and one of the images may really call that person to mind, then use that card, because that's ways our intuition talks to us to tell it, you know, to tell us, you know, give us the hints that we need in order to get the answers that we need to hear.
That makes sense. Thanks.
Any other questions? And look at that, we're at only 8 minutes over.
Yeah.
The minor miracle, because Brent and I both tend to run on. So, oh, look, it's my Q&A section, which we've kind of already covered. And I squint-a-vision. Keywords again.
Squint-a-vision.
There is the QR code again for the quick reference. You guys probably, like I said, don't need it. You have 3,000,001 sources of keywords for Lenormand. And then I am really bad at this, but Brent and I are busking for esoteric busking is what we were doing. So if you enjoyed today's lessons and would like to throw us a tip, there's the QR code to my Venmo. Here's also our contact information. Like, you all don't know how to get a hold of me, but here's our contact information if you have further questions. If you don't already know, I'm on Instagram. But Brent is also on Instagram as Fool for Tarot. This is his username. And he has his Gmail as twofriendlycards@gmail.com. But huge thanks for joining us tonight. And thanks for, because you guys are the catalysts for making this happen, actually. And we appreciate the opportunity to talk about two of our favorite topics.
Well, thank you. That was great.
Thanks. We like what we do.
We do.
Stop sharing and stop recording. Am I still recording? Please tell me that recorded.
It was recorded.
It was recording.
It was recording though.
It warned us. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, there